This is the DMT Insider podcast with me, Billy Differ, where we get access to people involved in productions on stage and off, but without whom the show would not go on. My guests in this episode don't appear on stage, but their work most certainly definitely does. I'm delighted to welcome Simon Evans and Debris Stevenson, whose new version of the classic Cyrano de Bergerac wowed sellout audiences at the RSC in Stratford-upon-Avon and is now transferring to the West End, including the original cast of Adrian Lester and Susanna Fielding. Can I start with you, Simon? I'd like to welcome you both, but can I start with you, Simon, to say this is a new adaptation of the classic, the 1897 classic, to be precise, and it's co-written by you and Debris. What's distinctive about this version? What makes it different?
That's a good starting question. I think there's a few things to answer there. So there was an intention behind the production initially, which was to be unapologetically sincere with it. We've sort of seen a lot of work these days that can be quite ironic, I think, or very knowing, and can somehow be slightly afraid to mean what it says or say what it means. So we wanted this to be a sort of unapologetically emotional experience. And I think to do that requires a little bit, first and foremost, of dramaturgy on the play. Like, I think your hold on an audience, your ability to move them like that can be quite fragile. So there was some dramaturgical shifts that we've made. We've made Roxanne a little bit older. We've given her a marriage. We've addressed some of the plotting points that Rostand put in that you might just sort of bump up against slightly. So that was the sort of first thing. And then the second thing, which Debris can talk about with much more eloquence than me, was an approach to the language that was a desire to celebrate the poetic without it. The original play is written in Alexandrine rhyming couplets, so 12 syllables, 6 feet, rhyming couplets for all of the characters. We wanted to explore differences in language for all of them. We wanted to celebrate language. We also wanted to tell a story about how language, for Cyrano especially, is not just a tool for him to express, but it's also an armor for him to hide behind. So we wanted to sort of celebrate language and delight in it, but also try to reveal what is Cyrano without language and what is he trying to mask and hide. So while we've not approached it with rigorous psychological detail, we're not turning it into some sort of wrought psychological drama. We are going, why does somebody become this good at words? What's he hiding? What's his wound? And what happens if we take those words away? But Debris should talk about the language of it much more than me, as she's just a genius.
Well, we love geniuses, so without further ado, I will turn to Debris, and could you follow on from Simon's very eloquent? Now, actually, just give me 1 second, Debris. Simon, for those of us that don't always necessarily understand the intricacies of these things, dramaturgy on the play, could you just give us an explanation for that?
Yeah, of course. So dramaturgy is a sort of good Scrabble point word for sort of plotting and character development throughout it. So dramaturgy is when you might look at, like, a Shakespeare play would be an obvious one. You might look at a Shakespeare play and go, maybe we don't need these scenes anymore in a version now, so we're going to take those out. Maybe this plotting needs a bit of refining or clarifying to tweak and go forward. So it's when you take the story more than anything, and you sort of go all the themes and you go, how do we just make sure that they're really clear throughout, which sometimes requires editing, shifting, reworking slightly to try and make the holistic thing hold together. That's
great. No, thank you very much. And without further ado, Debris, could you continue that explanation, if you like?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, it was really exciting to be brought into the mix on this show. And one of the things I love to do across all of my work, and I love about theatre, is the opportunity to have people sitting next to each other that might otherwise not sit next to each other, laugh at different things, crying at different things, laughing at the same things, crying at the same things. And I think something that really compelled me early on conversations was about, this sort of epidemic of loneliness and the power of being a body in a room next to other bodies and having that communal experience. And we've even received emails from audience members about how that does, the salve that is to loneliness. And I'm someone, my career has had a very niche and unusual set of twists and turns. I started off as a grime MC. This isn't where I thought I would end up. I didn't grow up going to the theatre.
Well, I must say, when I was doing the research and reading that Debris Stevenson is a dyslexic writer, grime poet, hybrid actor, and pro raver, I thought, oh gosh, what are we going to talk about? I can see it's not a problem.
And I am a set of paradoxes, and what are you is my most frequently asked question, and I've raised that. And I think that's what's beautiful about it, that we unite across our differences in those essential human emotions. And I remember the first time I did an adaptation, I was adapting Shakespeare. I was working on Much Ado About Nothing, and I felt quite intimidated as like a working class dyslexic writer. I thought, is this a place for me? And actually, what I found really lovely about it is trying to find that universality in these stories that have stood the test of time. And what I really love doing, and I have to do this when I make grime shows as well, is making something that honors the audiences that have grown up with those stories. And I think between me, Simon, and Adrian, I could, because they know the play so well and so much better than I did when I came into it, it really enabled me, alongside their grace, of like just being like, what does that mean? Why do we need to say that? I feel excluded, because a lot of people do feel excluded by theatre and don't think it is for them. And I'm someone that really champions making theatre accessible. And I always say barrier number one is boredom. As someone that went to the theatre and was just like, people are laughing at the in-jokes, but something I have to do, and that I did with Much Ado About Nothing, which we say in Love Island, was creating two sets of in-jokes. Some people get one set, some people get the other set, and that we can look at each other in curiosity and kindness across those differences. So that was sort of the starting point that felt really exciting to me, to keep it true to the time, but make it feel really current, and it gives us that ability to be vicarious. And then the second thing, which again, I felt really warmly invited by Simon onto the project, and I came in, I'm sure we'll talk about him and Adrian have had this bubbling away for many, many years. I've kind of come on board in the last 18 months. And my proposition was, I would love to treat the whole thing as a poem. I would love to think about the value of every word and how it can be working on a number of levels. I'd like to think about how Roxanne uses language, what are her poetic rules over Cyrano, and then Cyrano has a whole different array of using language. This idea of when is he more vulnerable and open? Where do we use more full stops as opposed to other? Where have we got more fluid, soft, rhythmic line ends? Or when are they feeling more abrupt and cold and stark, like this sense of armor? How does language work in a military setting, in a war setting, over a romantic setting? And that for me has been so fun.
Could I add one thing to it?
Yes, of course.
Which was just to echo everything Debris said, but it's also really funny. I suppose it's worth reflecting that, yes, Debris and I have come from different backgrounds to get to here. My background in writing is most sort of the highest profile thing that I've written has been a comedy for the BBC. And I similarly, like Debris, come into things in theatres which say they're going to be funny. I don't mean to disrespect anybody, but I've seen a lot of Shakespeare comedies that aren't funny, or productions of Shakespeare comedies that aren't funny. We really went into this to go, if we're going to earn your tears at the end, we're going to make sure we bring you a huge amount of joy before we get there. So we hope that it's also funny, and we have got a cast who are really gifted comic actors on top of everything else that they can do. So we really hope it gives you everything.
And the thing about the actors, I mean, you have such a wonderful cast. The fact is that you could write the most beautiful thing in the world, but if you've got the cast delivering it as if they're monosyllabic and they can't actually do anything with it, that would be, I would imagine, the most depressing experience for a writer to watch that happen on stage. And of course, it's the opposite of that, and we know from the reviews in Stratford that it was so well received, hence it coming to London and getting a second chance for people to see it, which is great. But Debris, going back to your sort of your upbringing and the way that you got into this, you said that your first Shakespeare was Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to know even how you got to that, because I know you're saying that was your first one, but even to get to that, how did you get to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a surreal whistle-stop tour, how I give the summary of my career up until this point. I actually couldn't read and write probably till I was about 11. I now know that I am very dyslexic, described as having the clearest case of dyslexia my assessor ever saw when I was 21,
Wow.
which was nice timing in my third year of university in a literature degree. But yeah, so I started off learning how to read and write through grime lyricism. So I grew up in East London. Grime is a form of music that was invented there when I was growing up. And it was really this moment where words, movement, and music all came at once and together. Like, a question I get asked a lot is, what are you? Choose a thing. And I think that I've come to realize, and what's become my strapline, is the body is the music is the word. There is no separation. And I think that's part of why, plays like Cyrano and Much Ado About Nothing, writers like Shakespeare and Rostand, like, resonate with me so heavily, because they're such embodied writers. There is such heavy musicality in the language, and those things aren't separate. They are together. The rhythm of the line suggests the rhythm of the character, and they create a real efficiency. See, I started there, then I kind of quickly got ferried into poetry, thanks to a family friend of mine, an amazing poet called Kayo Chingonyi, ushered me to the Roundhouse. Then I started writing poems. Then I actually ran my own company called the Mouthy Poets, which was a community interest company for 6 years, working with young people, teaching them creative writing, event coordination, and performance. Did that all over the world. Lectured at Nottingham University for 3 years at poetry. Then kind of wrote my first play by accident. So I often start with a why. Grime was getting really hyper criminalized in a way that I really wasn't enjoying. I felt that this was an art form that had taught me more than the classics ever had. And so I wanted to canonize them. I was in an academic institution and I just wanted to treat them as I would treat Shakespeare. So it started off as an academic exercise. What if Dizzy Rascal's first album, which is a seminal album, Boy in the Corner, was a set of Shakespearean sonnets? How would we analyze them? And where do we start? We start with mimicry. So I make my own version of the same rhyme schemes and metrical patterns as that. I collaborated with grime MCs and producers to start a dialogue about what we felt was poetic and could be canonized about that form. And then that became Poet in the Corner, my first play, which was on at the Royal Court. Which, yeah, is quite a debut, and I performed in that as well. And so since then, also somewhere across there, I did accidentally become a professional dancer and movement director.
Of course,
that's another podcast. Started acting. And so, yeah, now I've worked in TV since then. I'm doing a PhD at the moment. And, I've come to embrace that part of even being dyslexic is to think three-dimensionally, is to think laterally, is to embrace the many. And so really it's become about a why, those central whys. And that is having movement, body and music together. That is about uniting people across their differences through the art and having people sit together, having a grime play at the Royal Court. And we did lots of work to bring in new audiences
Sure.
for that. So it's like this sense of those become the unifying factors. So whether it's TV or whether it's a play or whether I'm acting, it's those unifying principles, that really mean that I can, and I'm doing an art installation, an art gallery in the summer, that really cut across everything.
Now, what I really want to now know is, how did you two come to collaborate on this piece, Simon? I mean, don't take this the wrong way, and I'm not being judgmental, but you don't strike me as lightly bedfellows in that sense. But then that's the wonder of theatre, that you come across. But I'm always interested to know, how did you just pick up the phone and say, do you fancy doing this? How did it come about?
Well, first, can I talk about my background as a close-up magician and scuba diving instructor?
Yes, please.
Well, if you must.
Well, look, it was, as Debris mentioned, Adrian and I have been discussing. I've loved this play for years. I was lucky enough to direct a version of it at the White Bear Theatre in Kennington about 15 years ago, and have always wanted to sort of have another go at it. And I met Adrian. He came to see a show I directed at the Donmar, and we sort of discussed projects that we might do together, and Cyrano was a real hot choice. And so we sort of sat on that for a little while, and obviously lockdown postponed it. Other productions came along, which sort of took the spotlight off it for a little while. And then the RSC reached out and asked us if we were interested in bringing it to them. And at that point, I had moved more into writing, so threw my hat pretty firmly into the ring to do the adaptation, but was very aware that while I felt really confident with the characters, the dramaturgy that we talked about before, the comedy side of it, the sort of plotting and all of that, and the dialogue, there are moments where Cyrano needs to soar. And yes, what Debris has talked about in terms of the sort of more hidden poetics of all of the characters are there, but there are also moments, I thought, I mean, the wonderful thing about this collaboration is how we have both taken on each other's aspects in this. But at that point, when I first spoke to Debris, it was quite a specific thing that I thought I needed, which was at some point, Cyrano needs to really move the world with what he says. And that's not a thing that I feel comfortable. And my God, what if we did a production that I arrogantly think I can do that? And it
then
works,
it went,
except for when he sort of lets rip and nobody is moved by it. So we spoke to the RSC, and I didn't see Poet in the Corner, but I'd heard about Debris, and they set up a meeting with her, and it was with me, Adrian, and Debris. And I'm sure we've all had that experience. Like for me and Adrian, it was a really personal project. It was one that we wanted someone to come in on, which was a difficult ask, right? Adrian and I had been discussing it for years.
Yeah, you've sort of closed in with it. Yeah.
We knew what it wanted it to be, and we sort of had this, I hope not too rigid, but certainly we had our heart set on it. And I just can't tell you how positive it was to just jump on a call with Debris. I remember Debris was not at home, was in some outdoor cafe, which is just indicative of her life in general. Was in the middle of some other creative, brilliant chaos with sort of questionable Wi-Fi. And yet even through the sort of fits and starts of a call like that, her energy was just infectious, and the sort of sense of her getting what we were trying to do with it was wonderful. And look, we can all be insecure in our lives, right? We can all be insecure in the work. We can all meet people and go, God, is that going to be a challenge to what I do or the way I want to do this? And yeah, I can see that in meeting Debris, you go, well, we come from very different backgrounds. But I just came off that call going, God, and Adrian was the same. We both came off going, it has to be her. Like that, there is complementary energy there and complementary passion, but also all the places where I fall short, she soars. And I hope all the places where she didn't have as much experience, I can move into and go, well, that's the area that I feel comfortable. And the delight and the joy of it, and it has been the most positive professional experience of my career, has been how there are jokes in the show that Debris has written. There are moments of poetics in the show that I have written, that what began, I think, as a real clear, I'll do this bit, you do this bit, all those fences sort of came down over the process.
Yeah, that was the bit I was just kind of interested to understand, because it's very different for all collaborations, and sometimes and particularly in songs where somebody does the lyrics, somebody does the music. Who does it? Do they go first? Do they go first? But when it's just the written word, it's quite. It's not as prescriptive as you do the song, you do the music, I'll do the lyrics, and for it to work, you obviously have to have great trust, respect, understanding of each other in that sense. Debris, would you say you got that off the call, even though the Wi-Fi was bad?
Man, I was so nervous because the Wi-Fi was so bad, and I knew it was an exciting call, but I've been writing for 20 years now, and you know when you get a call that is special. And I was busy. I was booked and busy, and it was a short turnaround, and I moved everything for this show, and I knew I had to, because I just knew in that moment, language is my special interest. And I met two other people who were like, yeah, me too, exciting. It's not often I get to have a 30-minute conversation about one syllable, but that, Simon and Adrian will entertain me, and also be excited and care, So I just felt very seen. And I think, particularly if you come from a demographic that isn't particularly represented, and maybe that demographic is compounded by many others, right? I don't hear or see myself super often in this area, and you can feel like you're apologizing a lot or explaining yourself a lot when you enter into the room. Oh, this is why I'm here. I know I'm unusual. And I think that can become a bit of a chip on your shoulder. Like you're going in expecting to have to explain yourself. And I guess I'm entering into a new era of my career, I think, of feeling like confident and secure in like what I offer and not having to explain that. And I've started to try and notice what it feels like when I just inherently feel understood. And that's not necessarily about you coming from where I come from or sounding like how I sound or looking at how I look. It's something I cannot explain. It's just a feeling of like, you can play, and to come to the funniness, we can be silly, we can be weird, we can, you can,
Which is life.
You feel safe. Yeah, you feel safe enough with each other. You see it with kids most, kids just become friends and they just wander into the back of the garden and come back with like a squirrel or whatever they've found, and they're just like curious. And I just really felt that freedom with Simon and Adrian from the beginning of like, we can play, and we feel safe in the things that I don't understand, that, that Simon or Adrian bring to the table, and it has just been a really great experience that I think has filtered into all of my work since as well, of just being like, this is what it should feel like, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that actually translates. That's part of why the show is so universal, is like between the triangle of us and, you know, then the wider set of creatives and cast, which have been so brilliantly put together. It's like, if we're all laughing and crying, you're all going to. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because we kind of cover all bases.
Yeah, we don't think it's funny, but we expect you to laugh. Really? You also, of course, Simon, you have the writing collaboration, but you are also directing the play. Do you find that's a natural continuum of what you've been doing, or is it a different part of the brain? Do you feel, oh no, I have to criticize that now, or I challenge that in a different way?
I think having Debris has been an incredibly helpful way of being able to shift my brain slightly when we went into rehearsals. I mean, we made a huge amount, actually not a huge amount, but there were certainly changes and tweaks and cuts being made in rehearsals as well. And while I could put some of my brain to that, it was really useful to be able to sort of delegate that and go, I'm staying in this environment as well. But I think, just to continue what Debris was saying, part of what was so satisfying about the writing process was that sense of collaboration. And I was really keen to try and take that on into the rehearsal room as well, especially, as you say, when we had a cast who are as brilliant as these people are. And there are, to my huge frustration, one of the biggest laughs in the show came from one of the actors and not me. As you can imagine, doesn't help the insecurity at all. But
you were a wee bit lemon-lipped.
Look, here I am now, opening the door on this. But we really tried to empower the cast as well to take ownership of things, and especially to Debris' point about every character having their own language and having conversations about how that affects the character and the way they move and the way they talk. All of that stuff was hugely helpful. But the sort of end point for both processes was the same, which was, let us create something, as I said before, which really moves people at the end. And Debris' point about loneliness is absolutely right. We wanted people to have this sense of real catharsis, you know, this sense of, I know you might reach the theatre slightly adrenalized, your tube was late, your trains were late, you know, there's a sort, and the world at the moment is angry and is loud. And
that's for sure.
We sort of went into the rehearsal process again. I mean, it was my sort of talk to the cast on first day. It was, I sort of want us to put our arms around the audience and go, just leave your troubles outside. You're ours for 2.5 hours. And I promise, if you let your defenses down, we'll treat you well and we'll move you. And that was a sort of, I said it to Debris and Adrian when we started. I said it to the cast on day one. It was sort of above our heads the whole way through, was, how do we make an audience feel safe? How do we delight them? How do we surprise them is the big thing. I think a sort of way of disarming an audience is to surprise them in little ways. And that's been some of the fun of the dramaturgy. It's, I thought I knew this play, and a little something has happened there, which I didn't expect. Not a huge shock, not a major revision.
No, sure.
A little unexpected detail, or the way a character speaks, or an unexpected rhyme or anything like that, just keeps an audience just slightly titillated the whole time, so that by the end they're just open. And the directing was, I mean, it's a big play. It's a big company. It's 5 acts that are in Paris and then in war, and then the last act moves forward 15 years. And yet again, it was just very positive, and everybody came to the table with ideas. And look, being a director, you're the most satisfying and thrilling version of that is when you are telling people where you want to go, and everybody is bringing you exciting new ways of possibly getting there, and you just sort of get to sit there and go, God, that's the best. Let's do that one.
Yeah.
So yes, I don't know that it would always have been as joyful as it has been, but those two, the writing and the directing and the collaboration of both processes, just elided really, really beautifully.
And I also think that embodies itself it's an indefinable quality, but it embodies itself in the piece. And actually, as an audience, we consume that. You know, I'm not going to get too deep about it, but that alchemy of watching something together, as you said earlier on, Debris, where you're sitting with people you don't know, it's an extraordinary experience in so many ways. One of the things I wanted to ask was, though, in terms of the specifics of Cyrano de Bergerac, do we fall in love with a person or with how they express themselves, Debris?
Oof,
Oh,
that's a hard question. It's
my
quite
God.
quite a universal question, isn't
Yeah.
it? Gosh, it's funny because we're, doing slight tweaks at the moment. So I've been watching and reading it quite a lot again. And it always surprises me, maybe this is overly self-involved, that every time I've watched it, I don't know, Simon, we must have watched it close to 100 times at this point, definitely including reading it, and we'll be over that. And I still laugh and cry when I watch it. And I was thinking, like, what is it about that? And when I was first reading the script, like the story more generally, and I asked myself that sort of inciting question. It's like, what is going to make me care about this? Which is a particularly interesting question, considering I haven't grown up with this story. I couldn't be further from this background, like, why do I care? Debris
And also
Stevenson.
potential audience, by the way.
Right, exactly. Why do I care? And what was so miraculous is I was like, rah, if anyone's going to understand this, surely it's me. Because I come from a culture where all we had was our words. Literally, teenagers were scaling buildings to erect pirate radio aerials to share what they had to say. And the news at the time wanted to tell you it was for money, it was for drugs, it was for violence. We've actually proven it cost money to people, if anything, and it actually lowered crime in the areas where it happened.
Yes.
It's like, actually, all we had was our authenticity. All we had was our words. That was our only currency. If I was your friend, it wasn't because you could get me a job. It wasn't because you could get me into uni. It wasn't because I was going to marry your daughter. It was because I liked what you had to say and I connected with it. And like that rage that Cyrano feels at like the misuse of language, at the way he holds art and its value. It's not about money. It's not about clout. It's just about like meaning what you say and caring about that. And I think, what do they say? Someone should like have a pet or an instrument that makes you care about something. Like we all understand that. We all understand, like, authenticity is such an interesting thing, right? It's like it's simultaneously the thing that when someone loves you, it's because they see all of it. But it's the thing that we're most scared to show someone in fear they will not love us because they've seen it.
Yeah, no.
Like that tension is something we all understand, and that care and that fragility, but also power when you own it. And so I think once I really understood, I was like, "Wow, we're actually the same," that. So I think, can you separate those things? I don't know, but I think you can admire someone for the tenacity and authenticity and bravery, but also fragility and fear within which they approach the challenge of doing both of those things or being both of those things.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier about universality, the universality of the story, that those things you're talking about there are things we deal with all the time. And I think that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing. And the more I speak to you, the more I understand this is going to be so fabulous. What would you say, Simon?
Well, yeah, just to add to Debris, I mean, Debris has a huge amount of emotional maturity. So she, at least at that point, associated authenticity with words. And I think what's really interesting about the play, and to your point about what you fall in love with, I think you fall in love with honesty. I think that's what I fall in love with people. And I think while the aspiration is that words equals honesty, that has certainly not been the case in my life for a number of years. And I think the thing I really related to in the play, especially now after the things that have happened in my life in recent years, has been anybody like Cyrano who can be that much of a sort of peacock with his language is doing that in a defensive way as much as anything. Yes, he can tell other people and he can tell himself. And indeed, the original play tells us that he is free, that he is the most honest because of his ability with words, that he is the most authentic. I actually see that character now and go, that person's hiding. That person is using all of these flourishes in order to not say the thing that he wants to say, or that he's not able to say. And again, I don't want to spoil what we've done with the end compared to the original. But in the original play, Cyrano certainly finishes in Rostand with the most dazzling flourish of language and words, and this sort of reiteration of the manifesto that's been his entire life, which is, I am a man of words and I am a man of integrity. We do something very different, and we actually throughout the play set up a thing that goes, there is, and I won't say what it is, but there is a thing that he wants desperately to say all the way through, and is much too frightened to be able to say it all the way through. And that's the thing that, on a personal level, both as one of the co-adapters and as the director, and my love for it all the way, has been exactly as you say, a very understandable thing of something that goes, aren't we all quite scared at the moment? And haven't we all been in situations where there's something we want to say and we're too afraid to say it? And how much healthier, better, more loved, more loving might we be if we were brave enough to say those things?
That's a very nice point on which to end. All I can say is I can't wait. I think it sounds fantastic. And I've got an inkling of why it sold out in Stratford and has resonated so well with people. So I just want to say thank you to you both, to Simon Evans and Debris Stevenson. And following that sold-out run I've just mentioned at the Royal Shakespeare Company, Cyrano de Bergerac is playing at the Noel Card Theatre June to September 2026. And if you want to get tickets, simply log on to our website, delfontmacintosh.co.uk. So thank you both. Thank you to you, Debris. Thank you to you, Simon. And we look forward to seeing you at the theatre.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.